Hey, you all.
Indeed, right.
Hope you're doing well. Always a pleasure to see and hear from the Ray.
Cool.
My question is, what makes horror effective to you? Plot, kills, acting? Also, can horror work without jump scares? I'll tell you this real quick. We'll give our short answers here because the question of the day may or may not have to touch on this topic. So just to give a short answer here, the Ray, what makes horror effective to you within the parameters of what D said, the plot, the kills, acting?
When there's a sense of reality, more times than not, there can be some fantasy things going on or some things that aren't really happening in the real world, but when it's just really grounded in reality or has none of that stuff. But yeah, top answer when it's grounded in reality, to keep it short.
No, but that's still a really good answer because I know that scares the crap out of me when it could happen to me.
Exactly.
Because I don't think a burnt man in a Christmas sweater, fedora, and a metal glove could ever happen to me. Who knows? Who knows? But compare that with a Conjuring, it's like, oh my goodness, it's a little bit more terrifying.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What about you, Joe?
Keep it short for the sakes of the question of the day. But atmosphere. I think a film, like I watch so many horrors like the Ray does, like Shutters, for example, mainstream films. Within the first 2 minutes of watching a horror, you can, if it doesn't suck you into that world, it never will.
Mm-hmm.
If you start watching a film and you lose yourself in it, that's a sign of a good horror for me. The one where you and then you become, and when you start to feel vulnerable as a character in that film, even though you're not in it. For me, that's what makes a good horror.
Nice. What about you, Danny boy?
Yeah, so I'm basically echoing what you guys are saying, but like the Babadook, that's like real. Yeah, well, there's a creature in it, but like it's a metaphor for grief and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So when there's metaphors,
Spoiler
like,
alert!
What? Oh,
spoilers for anyone who's never seen this. It's great. So ignore everything you just said.
No, it's pretty.
Spoiler for a 10-year-old movie.
Yeah, no, stuff like that. Conjurings are really creepy, but it can have supernatural stuff. It'd still be effective. But yeah, no, I think that would.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great answer, Dan. You sexy beast.
Oh my.
I love it.
Go on.
That's very good question, Jonathan. Very good question.
I love the German accent.
Thank you.
What?
John's thunder, though. I helped come up with this one finally. Fucking.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to take any credit at all. I just want to answer the question.
Oh, John has been killing it with the questions of the days.
This question is brought to us by Mr. Burja Rocar. What elements are necessary to classify proper horror? Now let's I'm going to start us off here real quick to contextualize everything here. Now, D brought up some good points when mentioning what makes like effective horror, the plots, the kills, and then he mentioned something about jump scares. What we're trying to answer here is, what exactly is horror, especially nowadays? Is it slashers? Is it the elevated horror that I mentioned? And I think the creator that kind of has messed this all up for us, whether it's good or bad, is Jordan Peele. because he has been making films that maybe you could consider horror, right? For example, his most recent film came out, Nope. And Anthony, you saw it, and you said that's your favorite horror of the year so far.
Yeah, I saw it recently, and until you mentioned that in the chat, actually, I'm glad we could talk it out here too. No, but yeah, and you were like, well, is it really horror? Is it more? What did you say? Like actiony? I think you said.
Yeah, I said something like.
Fair enough. And then it dawned on me. I'm like, yeah, there's lots of screen time, to be fair, in that movie where it's downtime and it's not necessarily what we think of as horror traditionally.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, what is the elements within Nope that classified it as a horror? Were it the few jump scares that it had, the few undertones of eeriness throughout? Because, for example, I really think with Nope, it's not a lot of horror more than it is I don't know, like actiony and a bit suspenseful.
Suspense. I was gonna say suspense.
Is suspense the new horror? Is thrill the new horror? What is horror? I've had this discussion with so many people, and I've had arguments with some people too. When I used to work at Universal, I had a coworker of mine ask me what my favorite horror movie is, and I was naming off a few, and I was saying, "Hey, man, but there's this new movie, Hereditary." So we're taking it back, right? That you should see. And he's like, "I've seen it. That's not really horror, man. Like horror is like the blood and guts." And I'm like, "That's what? That's your definition. That's your definition of horror." So what's our definition of horror, right? But let's put this a bit more objective. Let's actually give an answer here. What is an element that is necessary to classify proper horror? Let's go to DeRay here.
I forget who said it earlier, but atmosphere has a lot to do with it. It's hard to just pick one thing because so many things can be horror in my mind because they're horrific, they're scary. You know, with Nope, yeah, there is that suspense. It's like a sci-fi suspense movie versus a horror, but we still get, you know, our blood and guts in there. We could have had a lot more in Nope, to be honest. We do get a little bit of, you know, violence and, you know, just people dying, you know, people's deaths. I mean, suspense is kind of what's needed in horror too, even though people are like, "Oh, that's not really horror," but you want to be anticipating something. You don't want everything just to be thrown at you. You want to see what's around the corner or what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes. So you just need a good atmosphere and a curiosity of what's going to happen next.
That sense of anticipation that puts you at the edge of your seat. That's not in the same way like an action movie would put you on the edge of your seat, but more like, yeah. So I get what you're saying there for sure. Jace, I'm kind of curious as to what you think because it's your question.
Sure. Good question, Jace. I must have mentioned. Good question.
Thank you very much, sir.
I'll see you in the bunker later.
2 words. Uneasy tension. I feel like that is a true necessity to make something have an eventual horrific feeling to it. When you have the in-between moments that are filled with uneasy tension. When I say that to the point where, like, you know, people are like, "Wow, the tension's so, like, thick, you could cut it with a knife," or something like that in the room. Like, that. When scenes can be shown and filmed and edited and depicted in a way where you literally are almost like you yourself are legitimately sitting on the edge of your seat thinking to yourself, what the fuck is going to happen at any single moment? That, I feel like, is a very, very important element to have. Not for what leads to jump scares. I feel like that's the easy out. That's the easy take. Like, of course you're going to jump at that and stuff. Of course you're going to be a little like, well, okay, now my adrenaline's going a little bit. But when they can do that and introduce some other cool twists or a different creepy image that resonates with you that you have like nightmares about for weeks and stuff afterwards. But it's a lot of it is the lead up too. So it's not always just it's almost like with a joke. It's not just the punchline, but what leads up to the punchline. So I feel like that's a lot of what I would say is a very, very big necessity. Is just you need that uneasy tension throughout.
So far, right, we've gotten not the same answer, but similar in saying like anticipation of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
True, but it's not so much like I wanted to be clear. Where like tension is not strictly anticipation. Where right, when you are strictly anticipating what's going to happen. I know I was throwing a bit of that in my answer because I feel like they both have a lot of connective tissue. But when things are just tense, you know, like it's almost like imagine if you just had an argument with someone and then there's the aftermath, right? And then everyone's sitting there, and what is that feeling? It's tense. No one knows exactly what to say or how to say it or write anything. You don't know how to go about things. And that is not necessarily what's coming next, what's coming next. That's a part of it. But just to have like a tense feeling is just like, again, uneasiness. I don't feel comfortable. This is weird. And I feel like you need that in a horror element. That's what you need to feel is you need to feel like this doesn't feel right to me. I don't feel good about this. I feel uncomfortable. But that's a part of horror.
Now, Dan, I'm going to go to you, but I want to ask you a question here. And you guys can chime in if you've seen this film as well. Last week, Idris Elba's movie Beast came out. I know you saw it, and I saw it as well. It is not advertised as a horror movie. It's not. Yet it has all the elements that DeRay mentioned, that Jace mentioned, and even jump scares. whether we want to agree that's an element that we want to have in proper horror or not, right? It's in horror, whether we want it or not. There's a lot of jump scares in Beast, yet Beast is not advertised as a horror film. Should it be, though? Are there elements there for it to be classified as a proper horror, Dan?
I think there are definitely elements there. And I mentioned this in the chat. In general, like if someone were to ask me, oh, is that a horror movie or is this a horror movie? If it says horror on IMDb, I'll say yes. And that's just the general out. But for this question, you know, I get more specific. Like I'm like you guys, like there's some stuff that it says it's a horror movie on IMDb, but I watched it and I'm like, oh, that wasn't that scary. There's different opinions and different facets. But yeah, the Beast, because Beast actually does say horror on IMDb. But yeah, no, it wasn't, you know, advertised as such. And there were some creepy moments, some suspenseful moments. And I think you're going to get that in any like creature feature.
They probably did that for like marketing reasons because they wanted people to go see the new Idris Elba movie. And they were like, people might be a little bit put off by that. Let's just advertise it this way instead. But
yes,
backfires when they do stuff like that.
Yeah, because the way it was advertised was very much man versus beast.
Yes.
Yeah. And when you see that and you see the trailers, you think of a thrilling action film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then you see the movie. I saw it on Sunday, and I'm like, why am I so scared right now? Right? And yet it wasn't advertised like that whatsoever. But
was it a pleasant surprise, or were you not excited about that? You weren't prepared for horror. I
was not prepared for horror. I was not prepared. The movie itself, I'm like it's forgettable.
Yeah, it's forgettable. It was good though.
Would you say suspense, Dan? Would that be your easy answer here?
Suspense, yeah, definitely more suspenseful. Thriller.
So, like, if a movie's suspenseful, thrilling, you would consider it horror.
Yeah, well, like Jace was saying, uneasy when you don't know what's going to happen next. Tension, suspension. Like The Conjuring James Wan in general is really good at all of this. And except even though I like Malignant wasn't his scariest thing. Yeah, so I would say suspense that may end in a jump scare or may not.
I think I want to just sort of pull answers from everybody because I think you're all sort of saying the right stuff. I think for me, the only thing I would add, suspense is a big part of it. Jace, I think, nailed it, and DeRay talked about it too, with just the anticipation of something happen. It has to be something bad, though. It has to be like whatever the mystery is, if I don't care if it's a haunted house movie, it has to lead to death or something bad. I think that would just be the only thing I would say to qualify. Like if Nope ended as like a joke or it was a hoax or something like that. I don't want to fully spoil a movie for people, but if it did end like that, then I wouldn't necessarily throw it into horror. I wouldn't throw it under that umbrella. It stays in that direction. There's just not a lot of scary moments per se. It's a lot of build-up and it's a lot of suspense. And Hitchcock movies were famously like that, where it's just some people they may consider that slow because it's a lot of suspense. It's a lot of sitting there and you go through story. And like if you just dip in and out of the movie, you might not even know it's a horror movie because you didn't stick around for it. And then before you know it, there's birds attacking everybody.
Yeah.
Or in the case of Nope, there's some strange stuff in the sky popping down.
Speaking of Hitchcock, like it's also subverts your expectations, especially in Psycho. And actually, I saw The Invitation that was mentioned in like the question of the day, and that actually, it's not a great movie, but it has a lot of aspects that subvert your expectations of what's going to happen. Like, but it was good. But yeah, no, like Hitchcock is really good at subverting those, and that could be horror as well. Like you're not expecting it. Like John wasn't expecting horror element.
Whatever that threat is, it has to be real and it has to be something that like will lead to very bad results. And then I would officially call it horror, and I'd throw it in the horror section happily.
Now, Joe,
hey,
what makes a movie like The Avengers, where aliens fly out of a portal and destroy an entire city, not horror, yet alien about the xenomorph in a ship killing a couple people? Horror.
Good question. I could talk about this all day with audio. Like I'll stream what makes a horror, what doesn't. But it's funny that the same confusion doesn't come from video games. Like when you play a horror game, you're playing a horror game. And when you're playing Super Mario, you're playing Mario. If you're playing Gran Turismo, you're playing a driving game. You know the genre you're in based on how it makes you feel. And that is a horror. It's the feeling of dread. Now there's two kinds of horror. There's kill or be killed. There's the films that you enjoy watching people get killed, like the Friday the 13th, Dumb Teenagers in the Cabin. You get a sick bit of pleasure from that, like the Saw films. you kind of see you want to see the creative way people die, but then you get films like Haunt or Halloween or Jaws, where you want to see these people survive because you bond with their character, you get to know them, and it's good storytelling. And I think the problem with horror is there's so many bad ones and so many subgenres. It's hard to really define what it really is. But for me, it's all about the feeling. Like, what makes a good horror game? It's the camera angles, it's the atmosphere, it's the music, it's the fact that you're weaker than everything else, and that it makes you feel vulnerable. Like the film I watched recently, Black Phone, was a great horror film because I always find films with kids, you're more scared because they're weaker than a man. And they're like, what can I do to this guy? This guy wasn't exactly intimidating, but they're kids. What can they really do against someone like that? So for me, it's all about, if you just take the elements of what makes a horror video game and apply it to what makes a horror film, whether it be a film like Crawl, like that's a horror, but it's like animals of a genre. That's where it comes down to. It just comes down to atmosphere and environment. That's really what it comes to. Like you said, with Avengers, you can play an Avengers video game. That's not a horror. The aliens coming at the sky. But you can play Alien Isolation, and I'd be hiding in a locker for half an hour, because in Avengers they're overpowered and you feel safe because they're superheroes. Whereas in Alien, you're just a man. You're just a person against this thing, and you got nothing but a spanner or a flamethrower. Not going to do anything. So it's all about keeping things grounded and making you feel weaker than the threat, and that's what makes a good horror.
God damn, that was a great answer. I really love that answer. Great answer.
Thanks.
Wow. Wow.
Being smart sometimes.
It's all that booze. Drink up,
Thank you,
kids.
Italia.
Liquid intelligence.
Liquid intelligence.
It is.
These days, documentaries can be horror. It's all horror all the way down. Let's talk about this for a second. Can a documentary be horrific? Oh, what are you gonna say, Dan?
Well, the
Yeah,
subject
no,
matter.
Lake Mungo?
Like, so when it feels real, like, so yes, Lake Mungo, I was so scared of it, and I was scared for days and days because it felt like it was real.
I agree, Dan. Yeah, that's a great point. What is it? The Fourth Kind.
Yeah.
So if that's
God.
one where it's a ridiculous movie, right? But when I first saw that movie, first of all, the chick walks out, the main actress of the movie walks out and says, like, what you're about to see is messed up real shit.
Yeah.
She gives this whole speech about, like, yo, you better mentally prepare yourself because this is about to get fucked. And it was like, what is going? And they show, for reference sake, in Fourth Kind, that there's like the movie, right? So the actual with actors, and you could tell it's movie like, right? But they play it next to real footage, and it is shown as though it is real footage, as though the stuff is actually happening. It's all about like alien possession and almost, if you will, and stuff like that. And because it had that real element, that in itself is what creeped me out. So it's not even like the movie itself. Like, looking back on it now, knowing it's fake, I could watch that and just kind of chuckle here and there, right? And it's just more so, if anything, appreciate for what they were doing. But at the time, shit freaked me the hell out, and it was mostly because it seemed like it was real. So I agree with Dan's answer.
Yeah. But also, if he's talking about real documentaries, like true crime and stuff, that does scare me when I'm watching a true crime documentary because it's real.
Well,
And,
yeah,
like,
that's a good answer.
Yeah, and like the music and just the voices narrating it sounds so creepy, and the visuals look so creepy. And I know that this actually happened, so it scares me.
Exactly.
Unsolved mysteries, bruh.
Yeah.
Anyone ever see that show?
The Ray's YouTube
Yeah.
videos.
There was a-
The Ray, we haven't heard from you for a second. Is there a horror documentary you'd recommend for us?
A horror documentary.
Like it's a show or a movie? Because I know there's a lot. Because Dan was talking about like true crime being. Because I wasn't even thinking true crime. But yeah, there's a lot of different
that's
documentaries.
what came to mind immediately too. There's just so many of them. They're all so horrific. I'll think of something here in just a second. Give me a moment.
I was going to say to you, John, you're going to be happy to. I don't know who knows this, but you're going to be happy. They're releasing a video game of killer clowns from outer space.
Oh my god! Is Killer Clowns a horror movie?
Maybe for the time.
I would say it is. It's one of those weird films that kind of like shouldn't creep you out, but because the clowns are really creepy, and they're like do you know what I mean? Like, 80s horrors always freak me out because of the practical effects. It's something about like you knowing you can touch them and stuff that always freaks me out.
That whole horror comedy area in general is weird. Like as a kid, horror comedies creeped me out no matter what. It didn't matter that there were comedy elements. But then as an adult, I still love horror comedies. But the minute comedy gets thrown into it, the edge is gone a little bit. So I just take it differently than like versus a movie like Hereditary, which is very clearly straight horror. Unless someone disagrees that it's horror, that is. But I'd say yeah.
I have my answer, and it kind of goes back to your previous question about lore. But the documentary "Beware the Slender Man," which is the story where the two girls basically actually believed in that whole thing.
And they were young. They were all real young too.
Super young. Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah, I heard a podcast on it, and it's harrowing. Just here. Didn't like one of them, like as she was like stabbing her, like calling her kitty or calling her something like that?
Yeah. Another one, as far as like documentary true crime goes, a more recent one is I Love You Now Die, which is the story of the girl who basically texted her boyfriend and convinced him to kill himself.
Yeah.
That one is super terrible.
Yeah, they made a fictionalized show of that.
Well, yeah, it was a mini series, and they did a lot of really condensing, I feel like, but it was pretty true to what happened. But I definitely would have enjoyed it made in a different way. It was kind of too light, I guess, in a way. It could have been more fun if it was more dark, but yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Lisa's saying that regardless of subgenre, they need to have an element of fear for it to be considered horror.
I like moon genre myself.
Sun genre. That's my favorite. The moon genre. Let's see what Nick says here. An element of good horror is also what's not shown on screen. Many times your own imagination is scarier than anything. Classic case here is Jaws, right? Everybody always brings up Jaws or Nope, which is basically Jaws.
Yeah.
And even the Babadook, you don't really see the Babadook.
Well, and then also it's not even just like the characters, it's like what's going, like the story behind something as well, right? So even just like if you know what something is, like the Babadook, right? But maybe if you didn't know the history behind the Babadook, that's also what makes it creepy, is you imagining where did it come from, right? And sometimes, just like how it's mentioning, whatever you could think of or not think of, I guess, is sometimes even more horrifyingly frightening than them actually giving you the answer. I think sometimes they do too much with that nowadays, not even just in horror, but like all around. They feel this necessity to have to explain everything. And I think it's because to a certain degree, we usually like that. We have a sense of curiosity. We always leave with a feeling of, man, it would have been really cool if they told us like where that came from. Sometimes what makes it really cool is when they don't.
Yeah.
Right? Leave it. You got to know when to leave it be.
A great example is the Blair Witch Project, which goes back to the whole documentary question, because, I think that's why a lot of found footage, movies are so successful, because it does feel like we're watching something real, obviously, And that was actually marketed just like Cannibal Holocaust as a real thing before it was released. So they all went into it thinking that, it was a true story.
We're going to end this here with a little throwback. Lisa loves horrific documentaries. Don't F with Cats. One of my favorite docu-series of all time.
Crazy.
I didn't see it.
Love it.
It's nuts. Crazy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Trials of Gabriel Hernandez. I haven't seen this one just because it's like it has to do with the kid, and like I'd rather hear it in a podcast, but I don't want to see it because I'm only going to show pictures, and I just don't want to see that.
I saw it. It was
yeah. Was it tough?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, here and there, yeah.
And I have not seen Good Night, Sugar Babe, or even heard of it.
Yeah, I haven't heard of it either.
You haven't seen it, DeRay?
Not yet.
Yeah, no, same here. Just one more really good one. I really liked the Night Stalker. Sorry.
Yeah. Yep.
Night Stalker.
That was great.
So
horrifying, but great. Like, interesting.
That was really good.
So that's it for question of the day, guys. I like this discussion. Our first horror one.